The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this webinar of the International Fleet Managers Institute, how to identify the right MaaS solutions for your mobility management. My name is Steven Schroefs. I'm the Chief Editor of Fleet Europe, and I have the pleasure of moderating this IFMI webinar. As you see, the webinar is for information purposes only, and you cannot reproduce or redistribute any information given in this webinar without the permission of Fleet Europe and its partners. Why have we chosen, let's say, the topic of identifying the right MaaS solutions? Well, it's quite clear that we see that there is a transformation going on from fleet to mobility, and that more and more corporate fleet managers like you are asking how can they identify the right solutions for the company. Because going into mobility, probably the picture of the complete environment is becoming more and more complex, with new stakeholders involved, also new suppliers involved, and often, of course, when we talk about mobility, those initiatives are deployed more on a local scheme than right away on an international one. So it can sometimes be confusing to identify the right mobility as a service solutions. And we, together with the IFMI partners, thought that it could be the right moment to give you more insight in how to detect those kind of solutions. Now, I'm not going to do that all by myself. We have found for you, for this webinar, 4 expert speakers. And so they will, of course, also give us more insights in the ways that you can put your mobility program forward. So you see them here on the screen. We have the honor to be with us today, Chidiac of ALD, Mark Taylor of Athlon, Raphaële Cheniere of ALD, and Paul Baumeister of Athlon. So they are going to detail a little bit further what is going on in terms of mobility as a service and how you as a corporate environment can address the topic of mobility within your organization. So with no further ado, let's start with the first presentations. And therefore, I think that we have now in the call Chidiac and Mark Taylor, and they will start, let's say, with defining a little bit the topic of mobility as solution. And Mark, are you in this webinar room? You can put yourself on mute, please. Hello.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
I'm here.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. And also Mark Taylor. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Stephen.
So if we look a little bit at what is happening within mobility as a service, then for sure, if you ask what is mobility to 10 different people, then probably you will get 10 different visions. And so also here you see already that the 2 leasing companies that will, let's say, play a role in this webinar have their own definition. Now, if you look at the definition, of course, in the end, it comes to the, let's say, outcome that mobility as a service is creating a solution that is easy to access in terms of the exact employee mobility that you would like to address within your company. And when we talk about mobility as a service, then for sure we are going to a more trip-centric mobility, transportation, than when at these days within the car fleet management organizations, we are using a more car-centric and user-centric approach. So I think that we can now start with our first speaker, and that is Chidiac. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stephen. If you can already switch, yeah. So mobility as a service is still at its early stages, and customers are already requesting some and expecting some solution. When we are discussing the MaaS, the first thing we need to define is what is the mobility. And as you already mentioned, The definition will vary from one company to another, from one fitter to another, and from one stakeholder to another in the same entity. Therefore, the first thing in order is to define the mobility strategy. Then we need to profile end users. Who are they? Are we targeting single people in town, family living in the suburbs area? So what do they want? Where do they want to go? How often? What kind of flexibility are they willing to adopt? All these kind of questions are crucial in order to map the MaaS strategy with the end users and with the customer expectation. The position of the car is also crucial and need to be understood properly. Are we switching from one employee, one model car to no car at all? We don't think so. But as the market is moving, we need to define the position of the car as an option in the MaaS setup. Several initiatives took already place in Europe, and we will focus on them in a minute in order to understand how are the players and the actors and what kind of solutions are already provided. So what is modern mobility as of today? All gave the word frictionless. The biggest challenge is a multimodality is less friction, less complexity between modes, and more transparency for the end users in order to understand the impact of their choices. To make it perfect, we need to build the customer experience starting from the users. To be user-centric is crucial. And just by improving the user's experience on an existing mobility solution, we could convince users to take public transportation. The first vision of mobility was introduced in 1996 and with what was called at that stage intelligent information. Today, 3 models already exist and some are more advanced to another. The first one is the market-driven model, open to private companies, which will act as operator and integrator. And we have a current example running in Helsinki in Finland with WIM, a Finnish startup that offer mobility packages. The second scenario is publicly controlled. So public authority will drive MaaS services, will be responsible for both operating and integrating transport services. We have an example in Denmark when the project is driven by the city hall with one main question to be answered. Does the public sector meet social, environmental, and economic challenges through the MaaS solution? The objective of this model is to demonstrate that there will be a multimodal organization that can work only if driven by public transport organization and by the city hall. The third scenario is a mix between public and private, and we have an example in Sweden. Public sector will drive the integration, while the private company, will play the operator role. The goal was to test the business concept and the services looked in order to lessen or to eliminate the need of the second private car. The main conclusion of this initiative are all gives to the same idea. There's a seat for all stakeholders that will fit with expertise, capacity, capabilities, and solution on this ecosystem with a strong definition of role and responsibility. One conclusion to be transparent, reliable, and efficient. The potential obstacles and reasons for failure would be either launching a MaaS model where the public transportation is weak, incomplete, or unstable, to have a situation where few players are not ready to play together, or where transit agencies are not willing to play with the third-party platforms. Now I give the mic to Mark to discuss B2B to B2C setup.
Thanks, Anne. So we know that consumers choose and use the products that they like from an ever-increasing range, including Uber, Google Maps, Movable, Car2Go, and bike sharing. When they do this for business trips, the business-to-consumer solution shifts to a business-to-employee solution. And as a result, MaaS starts to become very relevant for the employer. As we've heard earlier, the current situation with regard to MaaS ecosystems is that they're evolving, but are still too immature to fully replace the range of services and products that are available today, such as lease and daily rental. Suppliers will come and go, and the areas of health and safety regulations, policies and insurances are all yet to be clarified. Therefore, it's too early at this stage for companies to start sourcing MaaS suppliers, as the best supplier today may not be able to provide the best solutions tomorrow. Also, employees may not like or embrace the company's preferred solution if they feel that there are much better alternatives available to them. So in a few moments, we're going to hear from my colleague Paul Baumeister, who will be providing an in-depth look at the cost of MaaS solutions that are currently available within the city of Amsterdam. However, in terms of costs, it's very likely that the total costs incurred by a regular MaaS end user will very quickly be more expensive than those from using today's traditional solutions like lease cars or bikes. However, this should be balanced against the costs from providing additional solutions such as e-bikes and electric car sharing, instead of, for example, promoting the use of taxis, as these alternative solutions can provide tax or financial benefits, they can contribute towards a lower CO2 footprint, and they can deliver improved accessibility, and if used correctly, result in happier employees. So at this time, we're talking about evolution and not revolution. And some positive examples of the revolution are employees who change from using one single mode of mobility to using multiple mobility products. For example, using an e-bike as part of a commute instead of just using a lease car. Employers who change policy and encourage and allow more flexible methods of travel. Employers who move from purchasing long-term supplier contracts and services and start to use subscription services. So it's about moving today's focus away from years to months, then from months to days and days to minutes. And with this type of approach, employers will be more agile and therefore better able to react to the changes, such as the diesel bans or complete vehicle bans by a city. So fleet managers can start to support these changes by taking a step-by-step approach to facilitating and managing alternative MaaS solutions alongside the lease car. So how do we think this will affect the fleet manager role? Well, we're all aware today that TCO management is a crucial part of today's fleet manager role. And because of this, lease companies have built very efficient services which integrate and outsource most of the administration and resource required to manage the company fleet. In turn, this has resulted in a significant reduction in the number of fleet invoices and therefore the amount of resource required to approve and pay them. However, we must now start to consider what will happen as we change from today's world and we move into the world of MaaS, and consequently the need to move from managing TCO to managing TCM. Clearly with MaaS, the number of suppliers, invoices, contracts and transactions will increase dramatically, as will the resource required to manage them. We will also need to take into account the different taxation treatments, different journey types, and having to account for splitting business and private parts of what may be complex single journeys. The change from TCO to TCM will be step by step and will not be instant. And whilst leasing will only form part of the overall MaaS solution, we believe that lease companies will continue to play a crucial role in supporting employers and fleet managers. The integration of fleet services and costs is what they do today, and therefore makes them the experts. So what actions do we think you should be taking today? In summary, there are two specific actions. Firstly, you should increase your own knowledge of MaaS. Secondly, you should really start to create awareness of MaaS and influence the key stakeholders within your business to support you. And some of the ways to achieve these actions are start to investigate what the new MaaS possibilities are, especially in the key cities where your business is located or it operates. You should talk to your newly hired staff about their vehicle and mobility choices to understand what they want. You should identify and map your employees' regular journeys. And you should talk to your lease company partners. You should use all of this information together to draw up a midterm plan to visualize how MaaS and what parts of MaaS are going to help your company and employees, and also to identify the challenges that they will present to you. And finally, I'm sure that your lease company account managers will be very happy to work with you and support you as you start on your MaaS journey. I'll now pass you back to Anne.
Thank you, Mark. So where are you in terms of mass innovation today? Are we in a continually changing marketplace? Who are the players and what we should be the must-have? So as Mark said, there's a lot of services, there's a lot of product, app and provider popping up every day, which makes the environment more and more complex and create a more confused picture. When we are discussing mass innovation, what should we include? Can we expect to have drones or jet as a future asset of mass? Are they real mobility? Not really. Mass innovation and smart mobility means feeling secure and happy in transport in their everyday life and a stress-free traffic environment. There's a huge number of new entrants entering the market and in order to make money on it, but more and more app product suppliers and more innovation, which makes a complex and early picture. Some of players will be naturally disappeared and it will support clarity. As of today, the key innovation and there's some key innovation and key options to be taken into consideration when we are discussing mass. For example, carpooling, car sharing, car hailing, or maybe e-scooters. And as you can see, car remain part of this discussion every time, but the ownership of the asset is being challenged. So what about e-scooters? Many experiences in several cities in Europe are synonymous to many accidents, injuries, and a lot of e-scooters destroyed. And in this case, it means that owning rather than sharing may remain the secure option. One of the most powerful innovations when we are discussing mass remains the use of the phone in order to promote mobility. Not using it during its trips, but rather using the phone to prepare the trip or to manage the very last mile and the payment of the mobility.
Okay. Thank you very much, Anne and Mark, for this already enlightening presentation and insight into mobility as a service. For the participants in this webinar, of course, at the end of the webinar, like we always do, we have a Q&A with our experts. So if you have a question, then please use the chat function of the webinar tool, and you can ask your question to one of the speakers. And at the end, we will have a short Q&A in which I will moderate the questions with the experts. So if you have a question, you can ask your question using the chat function of this webinar tool. We already saw let's say, the context of the ecosystem of mobility as a service. We also detailed how, let's say, the role of the fleet manager, today's fleet manager, will change, and what are, let's say, kind of the most visible options you will have when going from fleet to mobility as a service for your employees. Now we would like to make it more concrete with some business cases. So things that already exist on the market and where you can find some inspiration and that you can probably also deploy within your organization. And first of all, I would like to see with Raphaële Cheniere. As you can see on the screen, she is Marketing Intelligence Manager at ALD. In what way, let's say, that, for example, several initiatives can be combined together within a more harmonized environment, for example, with the MaaS Alliance. Raphaële, welcome in this webinar.
Good afternoon, everybody.
So the webinar floor is yours. If you are ready, we are ready.
Yes. So we wanted to talk to you a bit about MaaS Alliance today. So effectively, what is MaaS Alliance? MaaS Alliance is a community that was built at the European level in order to be able to design the future of mobility as a service. So more concretely, this community gathers both public and private organizations, meaning a lot of cities, a lot of transportation organization, whether public or private, a lot of different companies working already on some MaaS solutions, or only interested in bringing a view of what is happening concretely today in the transportation world and how it works. Because as it was said previously by the two experts in this webinar, the car is an option in the MaaS setup, but it's not anymore the only option. And to make MaaS work, it is necessary to have a cooperation between private and public organizations. And this is something that is obviously not so easy. That's the reason why this community exists. And I invite you to go and look for MaaS Alliance on the web if you're more interested in knowing all the initiatives that are being developed, because there are a lot. And basically, why is it important that leasing companies, but also other transportation organizations, participate to this kind of community? It's because MaaS tends to play, so we were talking about switching from user-centric to trip-centric, but something that is really important and that we see now appearing is that we talk about being citizen-centric. Because as we said, when we are talking about MaaS, we are talking about, of course, the employees taking the car or car sharing solutions or even e-scooters, but also using public transportation during their daily job in order to go, for example, visit a client and so on in urban environments. And this means we are addressing clearly citizens, which makes it a bit different from what we are used to when we talk only about user, as we say. So something that is really interesting, and that was also mentioned by the experts, they were talking about e-scooters, for example, and the problem of accidents. And we know that even when talking about our traditional fleets, accidents and protection of the employee are really important issues. Safety will always be something really important for all the companies, their employee safety. And you see that actually when we're talking, for example, about these e-scooters, but also when talking about any journey of the employee, we are also talking about safety. That's why, for example, there are already some initiatives in place to work around insurance for MaaS, looking at possible mobility policy, because we had driver insurance, for example, which will probably move to be mobility policies in the future. So these are the kind of topics that are being addressed by the community MaaS Alliance. But then if we are looking at, should we expect drones and jets in our future MaaS, you can be reassured that it is absolutely not the case yet. It is obvious that in order to make MaaS work and in order to work already on this integration of all the transportation modes for one single trip, it's already a really hard work between all the organizations, between public and private organizations, between public transportation and, for example, car sharing providers. So before we start talking about drones and jets, there are really hard topics that are current in reality and that are being addressed at all levels. So this is something also to be taken into account. And fleet companies who are part of MaaS Alliance are also there to ensure that they know what is happening in terms of MaaS development, to make sure that they can advise their customers the best way possible, to make sure that they know everything that is going on and that they will be able to provide the right information and the correct advice to their consumers.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Raphaële. Thank you for detailing the examples of MaaS initiatives with the MaaS Alliance. As Mark Taylor, our partner from Athlon, has already mentioned, the final part, let's say, before the Q&A, is more deeper insight into what you can do in a specific city. When we talk about mobility as a service, of course, often is related to the offering, to, let's say, the infrastructure that is already in place in cities. And so together with Paul Baumeister of Athlon, he is innovation manager, we are going to look how one of the most, let's say, innovative cities in terms of mobility is evolving, and that is Amsterdam. So the Dutch capital has quite some experience when it comes to sustainability and mobility. And Paul, being a Dutchman, can of course detail everything that we need to know about what can be addressed in a city like Amsterdam in terms of mobility as a service. So once again, we end this webinar with a Q&A, and should you have a question, then please drop that question by using the chat function in the webinar tool. But now it's time to listen to Mr. Paul Baumeister. Paul, are you in the room?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us. And so we are curious to see what we can do in terms of mobility in a city like Amsterdam.
Very good. Hello, everybody. My name is Paul Baumeister, and let's be honest, I'm not always as overdressed as I was on the picture on the previous slide. But I was wondering how I could be of any help for you. And because mobility as a service, it sounds like a big container, and I decided I want to try to make it a little bit more concrete, like tangible for you. Perhaps demystify some parts of mobility as a service a little bit. In other words, try to find out where are we. And for this occasion, I took a deep dive into the mobility as a service ecosystem of Amsterdam to look for answers on, okay, mobility as a service, is the new egg of Columbus? Will it solve the mobility problems that Amsterdam has? And also, for what customer group is mobility as a service working? Is it for the young urban professional, or just for the young? Or is it already capable of replacing leasing cars? And then how is mobility as a service from a business and cost angle? And I thought, and you see it on the slide already, perhaps these answers could be best, or this question could be best answered to show you some examples of recognizable profiles that perhaps also exist in your company. And well, let's go through them to see how they're currently traveling and who they are. The first one on the left is a young professional. He lives in the east of Amsterdam, and he works on where all the big corporate companies are, on the Zuidas in Amsterdam. And he works there pretty much in the city all week, and he has his own car, but preferably he goes on his bicycle in the typical Dutch way. But for business purposes, he needs to go out of the city for a 50-kilometer one-way trip every 2 weeks. And every weekend, he goes on a trip to meet friends or to go to a festival. That's one traveler profile. The other one is the young family that lives in Eiburg in Amsterdam and works at the airport just outside of Amsterdam. And that's a 3 to 4 day commute of 20 kilometers per day, preferably done by his own lease car. And then for business reasons, he goes out of the city for at least twice per week, for at least 50 kilometers, and is one trip every weekend to meet family and friends. So how can they switch from their current behavior into using mobility as a service solutions? And then we click to the next slide and you see an image of the phone, and that's where it all starts. Yeah, so the first thing you try to do is to start planning your trip. And in this case, it's a rainy day. So we look into the possibilities to take the car. Parking places are limited. Perhaps switch to an Uber, but then when you see the price, that's quite expensive. And in this way, probably public transport, the metro, is one of the fastest and cheapest ways there is. And what's really great in this Google Maps item is that you can also see that there are plenty of seats available. And I like to show this because often when I speak to companies, when they are discussing mobility as a service, they ask for a service like, okay, can you have a trip planning app where people can see in their agenda where they need to go and then have the best items to go. And hey, it's available for all of us. This trip planning tool, which is very accurate. Google Maps, it's at our fingertips already. And now it's just a case, if you know how you want to travel, and you know when you need to go and what trip you want to make, how to combine that with the solutions there are. And that's the next slide. So MaaS solutions, which are already there, are the car sharing options which you can use. It's the public transport we just saw. It's a combination of metro, trams, buses, but also trains for the longer distance. It's car rental, the car rental for one day at the airport, at train station, but also at different hubs. And it's quite popular as well for the last mile, the public transport bike, which you can rent to finish your trip once you're taking a public transport one. These are the most popular items there are in Amsterdam yet. And the e-scooter is not just authorized there on the street, so that's saving a lot of accidents and troubles for the moment. And what I try to do is like, okay, what are the costs of each item? And then I have the average costs based on a survey which I did online of the most suppliers where they added their prices. And you could see like, okay, public transport, taking the metro, it's 16 cents per kilometer. Bike sharing is not per kilometer, it's per day. Then you've got car sharing, some different companies that offer car sharing, and they all add up to somewhere about 25 cents per minute that you need it. And then you've got the cab service, the Uber prices that we just saw in the Google app already. And you can always rent a car, which there is, which costs more or less €6 for a day for a very small car, the Volkswagen Up, or a small family car, €70. So now you've got insight in, okay, if I need to go out once every 2 weeks for business reasons and once every weekend for private reasons, in the first profile, then I know, okay, when I choose different items, what are my costs? You see that underneath the two profiles that we see. So a young professional having his public transport for 50 kilometers trip will cost him €60, but probably also will need some bike sharing option for the last mile. And then I did an exercise. Okay, if we go back to the profile that he has, like using one trip for business purposes every 2 weeks, and then use it as well in the weekends, what are their costs if they switch from his own car and the bike that he has currently to the bike that he has and the mobility as a service solutions? That's quite a good deal for him. €165 more or less in total cost, giving him comfort that he can travel in a comfortable way whenever it's a rainy day where he doesn't want to use his bicycle. So that's already quite an interesting ecosystem for him to use. But then if you switch to the family that lives there with commuting to the airport, but also trips twice a week outside of the city for business reasons, then it becomes quite expensive. You can all imagine if you want to go with the whole family and take the public transport, take the train for a trip, then it's 4 times a ticket. That becomes quite expensive, as well as the car renting or the cab service when you have to use that. So still, when you have to change from your lease car or your own car, even if you have to pay for a parking permit in Amsterdam, it's still, from a cost point of view, quite expensive to switch to mobility as a service. And that will bring us to the next slide. On more, okay, what are our findings around the mobility as a service ecosystems? And that you could say they're quite immature. Yeah. And the great thing is for the young professional, it's already interesting to use that to get rid of the car and to use that in combination with the bicycle. Yes, but for the family, it's still a journey that has to be taken in order to become very attractive. Like, it's a hassle to start a journey. I mean, if you have to collect a car sharing, go to the car sharing hub and find your car there. Same goes for the bike sharing or the e-scooter sharing and the metro. You have to start the trip somewhere that you're not at the moment that you want to start. And then secondly, we all know from the electrical vehicles the typical thing we call range anxiety. Okay, will I reach my destination with this battery? And now when I talk to people using mobility as a service items, there's something called what I call the access anxiety. Okay, if I need a car to go to that trip, will it actually be there? And if I need to go back there, is the way I want to travel, is that available? So that goes for the shared car, the bike, or the train. And then the sum that we just already did is like, okay, it becomes quite expensive for families. So some remarks for the employer to take away, please click, is, okay, don't change too suddenly. Like, okay, well, we offer cars or car allowances, cash allowances, or lease cars. Don't throw that away too easily. Keep what you have, but then try to offer more flexibility. And subscription models are coming in place for bicycles, even for lease cars. And that makes it quite easy to change, perhaps after 3 or 4 months, or next year, to switch to mobility as a service items. You're not stuck into a long contract. And then the second remark there is, okay, try to start to learn. As we say, ecosystems are still very rapidly developing. That would mean that there are products available today that might not be there anymore in 1 year, but new products start to become as well. So it's very hard already to source, to purchase these products, but allow your employees to travel the way they want and focus more on the integration of these costs into your company. Let them travel the way they like, but then bring those costs into your company and pay them out. So you learn what they like, and then perhaps in 2-3 years, when we've learned a lot, there's a room to source in the products that you need. And then we do a tender, or when you rethink your mobility, don't focus too much on, okay, what's the mobility as a service travel tool or around all the products, because people using already tools that they like, or as we just demonstrated, Google Maps is very accurate and available for everyone, which is there. And then when you take one step back to look at the challenges of the city, most cities, and I know Amsterdam is best off when people take the bicycle. And it could be an e-bike or a bicycle. And of course, that's where it's safe and possible to take one. I understand that not all cities in Europe are the same as Amsterdam. That's probably the smartest way of traveling. It's healthy, it's clean, it's fast, and it takes limited place on the roads. So, do like the Dutch, all take your bike, and then a lot of problems are solved. And of course, we know Helsinki, January, -20, that might not be the most comfortable way to travel. But hey, when there's a possibility, just consider it. And that comes to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much, and happy to know if there are any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for the insights about mobility as a service and how to deal with it. Also the cost picture and the scenarios that you showed for Amsterdam. As mentioned before, we are now coming to the final part of this IFMI webinar, the International Fleet Managers Institute. We have the Q&A with our 4 expert speakers. You see them here on screen. Chidiac, ALD, Mark Taylor, Athlon, Raphaële Cheniere, ALD, and Paul Baumeister of Athlon. So please send your questions via the chat function. The first question for Mark Taylor of Athlon. Mark, you were talking, I think, at the start of your presentation about the fact that it's really important to engage the different stakeholders within, let's say, the transformation to mobility as a service. What for you are the most important ones next to fleet and procurement?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. It's an interesting question, obviously. From the work that I do with customers, clearly HR form an important part here. Anybody from the environmental perspective as well. For companies who have a particular safety culture, clearly engaging with safety. And I'd also recommend engaging with maybe some form of driver panel as well, and get a cross-section of drivers involved. When I say drivers, broaden that out to employees, to understand what they want, what their thoughts are, what their limitations are and their concerns are. So really, because we're talking about employees specifically, and anybody with the need to travel on business, it really can cover the entire spectrum. And if I didn't mention finance, obviously finance and accounts as well.
Okay. Very good. A question for Anne Chidiac of ALD. Anne, you mentioned in your presentation that currently, let's say there are 3 models when it comes to mobility as a service offering. There is the market-driven one, there is the publicly controlled one, and let's say the hybrid model between public and private. Do you have an idea, if you look a little bit at the European landscape, which of those 3 will probably the one that will dominate in the near future?
I think it's quite complex to have a clear answer for this, but what we can see at the moment is that the first scenario seems to be the one which is running at the moment. Doesn't mean that it's a full success, because when we see the figures, there's not a low level of engagement. It is still a big challenge for women in Helsinki in order to target all the Finnish population. So as we all said during the presentation, the MaaS is still under construction, and the definition is not complete at the moment. So we assume that it could be this scenario, but as I said, the answer is unclear at the moment. And as we see the result, this scenario is running at the moment, but they are not able yet to target the full population of the city of Helsinki.
Okay. Question for Raphaële. Raphaële, you stressed out, let's say, the interesting collaboration that is possible in terms of mobility as a service innovation. You talked about the MaaS Alliance. Now, when we talk about mobility as a service, of course, this is often linked also to local initiatives, local taxation, local offering, local demand, and so on. In what way do you think that it's already possible for a corporate organization to deploy a sort of mobility management program on a more regional or international scale? Or is at this stage essential that you, let's say, approach it more from a city and a local perspective?
Yeah, so definitely at this stage, global MaaS program, I'm not talking just the global mobility, but if we are talking specifically about MaaS, is definitely not something that is possible at the moment. You explained it really well. Mobility, it's a lot of local decisions, local taxation, local legislation. To be frank, the European Commission is addressing this topic, looking at how we could reach an harmonization in terms of legislation and taxation and so on, in order to make European MaaS possible, because in the end, this is their goal. They really want a European MaaS available, and they are even thinking about including not only local trips, but they want to have it possible to have your journey from Paris to Helsinki entirely possible through one and only application, through one and only account. But as you know, as European Commission knows, as everybody knows, harmonization in terms of legislation and taxation is not something that can happen from one day to another. So it's important to be aware that European Commission is looking at this since 2014 at least. There were studies run, there were business models designed at European Commission level, but they of course are really far from reaching a solution and an agreement. And indeed, so far, it's not something, when talking about MaaS, that is possible at even a regional level or regional scale, because all the initiatives that we see so far are completely local.
Okay. Now, just for your information, we with Fleet Europe are also addressing mobility as a service, and we do that in the Smart Mobility Institute, where we try to combine a little bit the mindsets of the corporate fleet travel, HR, and safety managers together in the transformation to fleet and mobility. So should someone in this room be interested afterwards to also know more about the Smart Mobility Institute, then you can let us know. Of course, a further question linked to the webinar is one for Mark again. Mark, at one moment, I'm going to take the notes. You said that it's a good idea and even essential to somehow create a midterm plan, a vision on the midterm when it comes to mobility as a service within your organization. So you have the stakeholder engagement, and then to try to see what is possible and create a midterm plan. What for you is midterm? In the reasoning that, of course, the ecosystem is changing at an increasingly fast pace.
Gosh, that's a difficult question, Stephen, and it probably depends on who you're asking the question to. For me, I would be looking at sort of 6 to 12 months as being midterm because of the changes that are happening. I think the most important thing is starting the journey to put it together. So actually pull all the necessary stakeholders together, start pooling your information, start talking, if you're not already doing so, to your external experts, IFMI colleagues, the lease companies and so on. Put all of that together to come up with a start point as a plan, and just be prepared to be flexible and revisit the plan on a very regular basis. Quite whether that answers the question, which is short term, mid term, and long term, I'm not sure. But making the start, getting the input, and reviewing and progressing are the most important things, because I have no doubt whatsoever is the plan will change, and change quite drastically as the ecosystems evolve.
Yeah, indeed. Okay. A question for Paul. Paul, you gave insight in terms of the mobility as a service ecosystem for Amsterdam. And let's say the key learnings. You mentioned keep what you have and add a little bit more. Does this mean, for example, that, and also when we look a little bit at what the cost elements were that you presented, that you say that probably it's more interesting for employees that have already a leased car or a company car to go to mobility than for the other ones?
No, perhaps even the opposite. If you don't have a car yet, you've got a great fallback scenario with all mobility as a service solutions that are available for you to travel in quite a comfortable way. If you have to keep your lease car behind, there are quite some challenges to overcome still at this moment. But it's good to start, and to start the best way is to have an add-on to learn about the new possibilities, and also creating a little bit of MaaS for all the mobility solutions which are built. So for employers, give a little bit of room for that learning phase in your policies. That next to the lease car that you have, you're also entitled to, for business ways, to try a little bit in the mobility as a service domain. And also make the declaration of costs quite easy, because often it's still linked to the private consumer, the products that are. And in that way, learn, and as a result of that, you as an employer, you as a company, will learn what products you have to source to become a relevant employer in the next 3 to 4 years.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to our panel of experts. We have come to the end of this webinar of the International Fleet Managers Institute. There will be a recorded version of the webinar that we will distribute at our website, and you see it here also on the screen, ifmi.fleeteurope.com. There will also be a little satisfaction survey so that we know what you thought about this webinar and how that we can improve upcoming webinars. And don't forget that on the 6th and 7th of November in Portugal, Estoril, we will organize the Fleet Europe Summit, and specifically related to the International Fleet Managers Institute, we will organize an IFMI Masterclass on the 6th of November, in which we will detail how you can move your fleet program forward, but really with added value in a concrete way. So there will be sessions dedicated to supplier optimization, to WLTP, and there will be workshops about TCO and TCM, and also how to manage the different fleets that you might be in charge of. So you have smaller fleets, complex fleets, bigger international ones. All of this will be dealt with during the IFMI Masterclass that we will have in Estoril. And of course, for those corporate fleet and mobility managers in the room, you can still register for that masterclass going to the event website summit.fleeteurope.com. So thank you very much. We hope to see you in an upcoming IFMI initiative. And we would like to thank all our partners and sponsors, SEAT, ALD Automotive, Athlon, and LeasePlan for their support. Thank you. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.